Hey everybody, what's going on? So a lot of you on YouTube have been asking me, they're like, Bobby, when are you gonna give us the GFX 100S review? When is it coming? Well, I've actually had the camera in my hand since it was publicly launched, and I have been putting it through its paces. I've actually been using it on professional work jobs that I've been doing. I've been taking it out on a variety of photo shoots, and I really wanted to give you guys more of a longer term review on the camera to answer some of the questions you may have. Should I go into medium format? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses of this camera? So here we are to talk about my thoughts on the GFX 100S, the 81.7, the 45-100, and a few other lenses. Let's talk about it. So before we get into things, I do want to let you guys know we are not paid or sponsored for this review. Fujifilm Singapore has been very kind enough to loan me the lenses and the camera. Having said that, these are my thoughts and my thoughts only. And also, a lot of you have asked me to slow down in my talking. I speak too fast, a lot of you have said, so I'm going to slow down on this. So if this video has become 35, 40 minutes long, you know why. I'll speak very slow so you can understand me. No, I'm joking aside. I get the feedback, and so I'll take a breath here and there and go through this review with you guys. Okay, now in terms of the camera, we'll talk about the design. Now we already have sort of talked about this in my first impressions video with Ivan. We'll put a link right here, so check that out. But if you don't want to watch that, I'll just kind of give you the concise thoughts on the build quality and the feel. Build quality is fantastic. This is the best built GFX camera in Fujifilm's lineup. It feels very solid, very robust. Fujifilm has really improved the design and the buttons and the overall quality of it over the 100 in my personal opinion. The ergonomics are fantastic. This feels like a full frame camera system. Other people have said this, and I will repeat it as well. I have a variety of full frame cameras out there, including the Lumix S1R that you see a lot here on this channel. I put those cameras next to each other, and I would say that the Fujifilm is roughly the same size as the S1R, maybe even a little bit shorter. So that just goes to show you what Fujifilm has done with this camera system, putting a medium format sensor in such a small body. The grip is great. If you have larger hands like myself, you're gonna really like this grip. Even if you have smaller hands, the grip is very ergonomical. You can actually have this nice little indentation here for your fingers here. It feels really good. There is a bottom plate that you can get for this. I think it's an Arc Swiss plate that will sort of extend the depth of or the length of this camera a little bit. If I was to own this camera, I might get that, because while this feels really good with all my fingers here, that little extra room is always welcomed. I like battery grips personally, but you can't put a battery grip on this, so that extra plate will come in handy. Besides that, the weight distribution is really good on this as well. It does depend on which lens you're going to use, and I'll talk about that in just a bit, but overall build quality is solid. The EVF, the rear display, all is really good. Now let's talk about the EVF, because this has been a topic a lot of you have been asking me about on Facebook and also on YouTube. We're kind of jumping ahead a little bit because, look, we've already talked about this, the initial specs. Initially, it's a 100 megapixel sensor, IBIS, all that. You pretty much know all that. So let's talk about the EVF. Now, the EVF is a 3.69 million dot EVF. A lot of people out there were quite upset that this wasn't the 5.76 million dot EVF that you were getting on the GFX 100. And now I do understand those concerns. And I can tell you that from day-to-day usage and using this over the past couple months and using it on a variety of shoots in low light and in bright daylight like we're shooting today, I don't notice much of a difference. The EVF quality is very good on this. And this is something that you need to take note of on any camera system outside of the GFX for that matter. Don't look at the numbers. Actually look at the optical quality coming out of the EVF. It could be the glass, the optics, it could be the LCD panel. These are all things you need to take in consideration. Case in point, I had an A7R4 from Sony for a while that I was testing, and that is a 5.76 million dot EVF on that. I put it compared to this. This was a much clearer EVF at 3.69 than that was at 5.76. So it does vary quite a bit. Now, you will notice sometimes the lack of resolution when you're in really low light situations and you really want to punch in and zoom in on something. Let's say if you really want to just fine tune that and you're manually focusing, you will see that you would like a little bit more resolution. Now, you can do a performance boost on the EVF to give you that higher frame rate, which does help out quite a bit. But yeah, there are some moments you might miss the 5.76, but I will tell you overall, I can probably count on one hand the times that I was like, you know what? I wish I had it versus not. So it's not a deal breaker. I wouldn't take much weight into people that are complaining about it because, to be frank with you, I didn't notice it from day-to-day performance. Battery life on this. Battery life is actually pretty good. Now, they are using the XT4 batteries on this, which is different from the GFX 100. Day-to-day usage, I mean, obviously it's great to get a couple batteries anyway, but I can get through a full shoot, no issues at all with one battery. I never had to change batteries on that. But again, how I shoot is I take shots, I turn off the camera, then I reset, take shots, turn off the camera. So that's how I utilize this camera system. If you want to keep the camera on all the time, then you might see some battery drain. What else to take note of? The rear display, very good. Not the highest resolution rear display out there. I wish it would swivel out, but Fujifilm is really targeting this more for photographers than for videographers. Hence, we get that flip out and sort of that portrait tilt, but we don't get that flip out rotatable display that you see on a lot of other cameras out there, like the X-T4, for example. But again, it's not a deal breaker because this is mainly for photography. We'll talk about the video later on in this review because some of you will have questions on that. We will address that and show you some samples, but we're just going over some of the basics first. Outside of that, the buttons and the dials feel really, really solid. They remind me a lot of the X-T4 and in terms of the build quality. So if you really like that camera system, you're really going to like the GFX 100S in that regard. But that's pretty much it in a nutshell. It's really good. I mean, I do wish it has two UHS 2 card slots. I do wish there was a CF Express Type B card slot in this because at 100 megapixels, if you want to shoot quite a bit of shots, like in burst mode, you get the buffering's going to kick in. It would have been nice to have a card, had that speed, that right speed, that would have definitely helped because these images are very large coming out of this camera, especially shooting raw, but it is what it is. Perhaps they'll put that in a future version of this camera system. Okay, besides that, that's sort of the outside of the GFX 100S in a nutshell. Let's talk about what it's like to use. So in terms of day-to-day usage and how this performs, let's first talk about autofocusing because this is a hot topic of conversation, especially with this camera system. I mean, Fujifilm was touting a very fast autofocusing system, and it is very fast for a medium format camera. So much so that you start seeing people trying to compare it to full frame camera systems out there. And then when they're like, well, it doesn't shoot sports that well, or maybe it's a little bit struggling with fast action, photography, they forget that they're using a medium format camera because that's how good the autofocusing is. Now, in terms of its speed, it's really good. Now, in terms of eye tracking, it is still hit and miss, and I'm waiting for a firmware update from Fujifilm. I don't know if there was one coming. This is just my guess because they are pretty good at updating. But the eye tracking does work better on some lenses versus others. Case in point, when I use the 45 to 100, I find the eye tracking more reliable. When I use the 81.7, it is hit and miss. This is something that I've seen in other lenses as well. So these are just my personal opinions, and based on my usage, it may differ for you. But I hope that there's more of a consistency coming from Fujifilm in regards to that. But regardless, if the eye tracking doesn't work, then I just use face or I just put the box on someone's face and I'm good to go. But overall, I'm really happy with the performance of this camera system. I did review the Hasselblad X1D2. I'm currently testing the 907X, and I can tell you that using this camera after those, it is a big relief in terms of the autofocusing. It is really that good, and it's pretty precise. Sometimes if you're going to be shooting wide open at 1.7 on the 80 millimeter lens, you will find that the focusing, even though you thought it's on someone's eyes, it could be on something else. So it's always good to double check. This is all like this with all medium formats. So I'd always say, take your time, be slow, be methodical, make sure you got the shot. But if you're stopping down, no issues at all. Another thing to look out for is also low light performance. This is one of the great attributes to this camera, and this is something that I really enjoyed using the 100S for, especially when I was doing some night photography and I really wanted to get very good shots, but not a lot of high ISO, like noise coming into the image. Now, in terms of the ISO, like if I was to shoot around 3200, 6400, or even 12,800, those images are very usable with this camera system. Yes, you're going to see some noise creeping in, but it's not uncontrollable in terms of, if you want to do some post-production on those images. It's very easily to kind of bring it down. But even at 3200, the images are very clean. 6400, also very clean. And I'll show some sample images. We'll go into Lightroom and I'll show you some low light images as well with this camera system. Let's talk about just overall image quality, because you're going to get this camera system because you want a 100 megapixel image. You want the ability to crop in and really sort of reframe an image if you need to, or if you don't have a lot of lenses and you want those different focal lengths. this 100 megapixels is really going to help you in that regard. The image quality out of this camera is spectacular. This is the best imaging I've seen out of any consumer grade camera to date. I mean, I'm not factoring in phase one guys or any, let's say, H6D100C, because those are different cameras for a different market, okay? This is coming in around 6,000 USD. Those are coming in at 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't want to compare those cameras to this, but in terms of just the consumer market, this is the best image quality I've seen out of a camera. Having said that though, you also do need to take consideration of the file sizes that you're going to be facing with that. This is something that you will learn very quickly with this camera system in day-to-day usage. Let's talk about that for a moment. 100 megapixel image. Out of this, if you want to shoot uncompressed RAW, you're looking at around 200 megabytes thereabouts. And if you want to convert to TIFF, you're around 600 megabytes. This is a very large file. We talked about this in my GFX 100 review. We'll talk about it here. This is very taxing on the system, and so much so that I would recommend for a lot of people out there, if you're just going to post to social media with this, shoot in JPEG. You're still getting around 60 to 80 megabytes of information on a JPEG image, and you can still edit those images relatively well, decent dynamic range in JPEGs, that it's going to be fine for social media. But if you really want to maximize this camera system, make sure you have the storage and make sure you have the processing power in your computer to handle what this camera can provide, because it will tax your system. Photoshop, Lightroom, whatever you throw at it, you're gonna see it unless you have a Mac Pro or a big PC tower that's got the latest NVIDIA graphics card in it and latest processor, you're gonna see some slowdown. Definitely can work though. I mean, because you got compressed and uncompressed RAW, so you can play around with the size of the raw image in terms of its megabytes, but it's a lot to take in, okay? But I did find that amount of information really did help me for a lot of the shoots I was doing, especially if I needed to manipulate the light a little bit or if I needed to really, hone in on something. I had a lot more information to play with. Cropping power is also a great attribute. Some people say, you don't need more than 24 megapixels, and there's truth to that. People are right. But if you need to crop in on something, if you're doing any sort of wildlife or sports photography and you need to crop in, something higher than 24 megapixels does make a big difference. 100 megapixels, probably overkill for most of you out there, to be frank with you. But if you want future proof and you really want to have those file sizes, because just in case one day you want to print on a building, or you really want to crop in on someone that's far away in a distance and you know that you don't have the focal length to grab them, this is where this sensor comes into play with that. But let's talk about one of the questions a lot of people have is they said, why doesn't Fujifilm allow you to reduce the, not the raw file size in terms of its file size, but in terms of the megapixels? Why not 75 or 50 megapixels instead of 100 megapixels? Why can't we have that choice? Now, you can do this in a phase one camera, but you cannot do this in the GFX 100 yet, S or 100 for that matter. Now, this has been brought up to Fujifilm many, many times. I've spoken to management to them about this as well, because this is something a lot of you out there want to do. I think they're taking this in consideration, but because they sell a 50 megapixel camera system out there and 100 megapixel, they're allowing you as the consumer to choose what you want. But having said that, I do agree with a lot of you out there. This would be nice sometimes where I'm like, look, I don't need 100 megapixels. I'd rather have 50 megapixels. Why can't I do that? So, maybe they'll add that into the future. But here's a little bit of a tip. If you do want to reduce the megapixels in a very it's a little bit of a tricky way, you can go to 35 millimeter format on this. So you'll get that crop and you'll reduce the files, the megapixels to around 60 megapixels thereabouts, okay? So you can do it if you want to shoot in 35, but if you want that full medium format frame size, then of course you're gonna be stuck with 100 megapixels, okay? It is what it is, as I say, but the image quality is absolutely fantastic. The dynamic range is fantastic. 16-bit, 14-bit, you are going to be blown away by what you see out of this. And if you want to do portraits, good luck on this skin retouching. Please have a makeup artist on set. Please use a diffuser, because trust me, when you shoot with this camera on someone's face, every blackhead, every pore, every pimple, every imperfection shows in great detail. So if you want to shoot your girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife, diffuser, trust me, they'll love you for it. But besides that, let's talk about burst mode for a second on this, because burst mode, obviously this can do up to 5 frames per second. This is not gonna do sports in that regard. It doesn't track that well. Don't try it. You might get lucky with a couple shots, but it's not designed for that. Some people have said, yeah, you can shoot some sports with it. You can shoot some fast action. I have tried this on a variety of things, from dirt bike riding to people walking. I found zone focusing works the best, performance boost on autofocus, but it's still not going to get that hit rate that you're going to get out of, let's say, an Alpha 1 or a 1DX3 or 1DX2 or an A9 or even an R5, okay? So if you're looking in that range to do that kind of photography, this is a medium format camera. You might get 1 or 2 shots, but you're not going to be able to track like you can do on those other cameras, okay? So maybe that will improve in our future firmware update. I don't know, but as it stands today, on May the 7th, 2021, it doesn't track as good as full frame camera systems do as of yet. So before we go into Lightroom, and I'm going to show you images from the 81.7 lens, the 45-100, the macro, I want to talk about something that a lot of people have been quite passionate about online, on the Facebook groups, on forums, and et cetera, and is there a difference between full frame and medium format in 2021? Well, to answer this question for you, let's kind of backtrack to the film days. There was a big difference in terms of film resolution and the size of the image from medium format and 35mm film. But as we've sort of crept into the digital world, it's sort of changed. And in 2021, with the very fast aperture lenses that we're seeing out of the full frame camera systems today, the better dynamic range, the 14-bit colors, and just the great ISO performance, and the sharpness and the resolution you're getting, that difference is very, very minimal to the average viewer out there. So I'm not saying don't get the GFX 100S. No, not at all. I actually really like this camera system, okay? I've really enjoyed using this. What I'm trying to say to you guys is that get the camera that speaks to you the most. If you need 100 megapixels because you need that cropping power and you need that flexibility in your images because you're working for a client that you may need to print large or small and they want to have that, or they want to crop in on a certain portion of a piece of clothing or a car, whatever it may be that you're shooting, or even let's say you're doing wedding photography and you want to crop in on a certain portion of this group shot, you can do this with this camera and you're going to get a great, sharp, high resolving image. Now you can do that with some of the full frame camera systems as well, but it's going to be different at 100 megapixels. But just in terms of the average photo that you're going to see online, you really can't tell nowadays what is medium format and what is full frame. The depth of field has that gap is closed with all the very fast aperture lenses out there. You know, while this has 16-bit, you know, full frame is at 14-bit right now. When you compress an image and put it on Facebook and Instagram and on the web, you really don't see much of that bit rate difference in terms of the color. So it's a little, you mean the compression kicks in and you sort of lose a little bit of that. When you have to shoot in, let's say, lower light situations and the ISO goes up, that sharpness, that resolution sort of diminishes a bit. So everything's sort of on an even playing field. So why I say this to you guys is this. Don't go down that road of medium format is better than full frame. Yeah, you get a larger image in terms of its, you know, the dimensions of it, and you get higher resolution. But that's not what this is about. You want to get the camera that speaks to you, that makes you want to take a photo. And, you know, at the end of the day, if you're a sports photographer and you're like, look, I want to capture a lot of fast action, moving subjects and things like that, and I would love medium format, but it doesn't really work for me. Am I going to lose out? No, you're not going to lose out, to be frank with you. The client won't know, to be frank, okay? But if you're someone that just wants to do really nice still photography, maybe a little bit of movement, but you really want to capture that beautiful colors. You really want that 16-bit color because you're capturing the nuances of something, and you really want the skin tone or the flowers or the landscapes or whatever that may be, or even a product. This is where medium format still shines. And I say that just so you guys know out there, I'm being real with you, don't go down that road of the argument. Both cameras are really good. Just get the camera that's right for you. Anyway, now let's go into Lightroom and I'm going to show you images from the 100S, the 81.7, the 45-100, the 250, and of course, the 120 macro. All right, guys, we are now in Lightroom taking a look at images from the GFX 100S long-term review. Now, I have a series of images that I've taken for professional shoots, also for fun, and also testing out a variety of different lenses. Some images are in JPEG, some are in TIFF. The reason being I've had this camera since when it was first released, and Lightroom did not have a lot of support for it. Capture One did. Unfortunately, I'm using the Apple MacBook Pro M1 chip, and that does, capture point works pretty well on it, but it is a little bit slow. And I think for the comparison, I just find the Lightroom interface a little bit more user-friendly in this regard. So I'm just gonna kind of go over some of the final images I've taken over the past couple months to show you what I've done with them. And I will show you some before and afters as well. So let's kick things off. Let's look at this McLaren here. This is the McLaren GT, and I actually shot this a while back. We used bronze colored lighting for this. Now the GFX 100S is beautiful, and the tonality, the 16-bit colors really comes alive when you're shooting vehicles, especially like this. I was using the 45-100 f4 lens at this, ISO 160, around 67 millimeters, 1/640th of a second. And I'm really happy with this image. Of course, it has been edited quietly to get the sun rays in there and to sort of accentuate the colors a little bit, but I'm really happy with the overall image. And this is really where you see the power of the GFX 100S. Now, this is a JPEG, and even at 49 megabytes thereabouts, this is plenty high resolving, very high resolving. As a matter of fact, a lot of the times for Facebook and for Instagram, I actually reduce the file size to about 2,500 pixels on the long side, just so I can get the maximum resolution when I upload it. But again, everyone has their own personal preferences in that regard. Now let's look into some action as I was talking about in the video. The action, shooting action with the GFX 100S is a little bit of a challenging experience. Case in point, the tracking isn't up to par, let's say, with the faster full frame camera systems or even the X-T4 for that matter. So you're really going to have to, know where your subject's at and fire away. And sometimes it's luck, sometimes it's settings. I use zone focusing. I put performance boost on autofocus as well. And, I shoot a series of shots, about 5 shots, and I grab one of them, and I've gotten lucky with a few different shots in that regard. Case in point, here's this motorcyclist who is jumping over this log. He's sharp right here. This is a TIFF file at 610 megabytes, so it is going to take a little bit of time to render. See, the images has been resolved, and it is tacked sharp right in this area. Look at this. This is very, very sharp. And this is the nice thing about this lens and the system is that if you nail it, you really get a good image. Okay, let's look at some other images here. Since we're on motorcycles, let's go to this Aprilia, the RS660. Now, this is something that I shot myself. This is a TIFF file at 590 megabytes. Guys, you want this camera? Get storage. 512 gigabytes on your iMac, your MacBook Pro, your PC laptop. It's not gonna cut it with this camera. Get some external storage, you'll thank me later. This is with the 45-100 at f4, 1/80th of a second, ISO 100, and this is tack sharp once it finishes rendering here in Lightroom. Takes a moment or two, but this is a very, very sharp image. Here's another shot of me on the motorcycle. This is a JPEG. I had to reduce this. This is actually set for Facebook and Instagram, but just to give you an idea of the resolution, even when I set that size, this is at alongside 2,500 pixels, 3.69 megabytes. But look at how this holds the resolution and the, just the details. This is really, really impressive. Now, I did do some enhancement with the sky with Luminar AI. You'll see a couple more images where I do that as well. I think that's a really nice tool to sort of enhance your images a bit without making it look too fake. You can go overboard, but just a little bit does add a bit of a nice punch to it. But I'm very happy with that. Now let's move on to Portraiture here. This is my friend Alan for a Hugo Boss shoot. Now, the final image has a lot of his skin cleaned up and the patches right there, but I just want to show you in terms of the TIFF file to give you an idea of the resolution and, of course, how it renders with skin tones. This is with the GF80 f1.7 at f3.2 because I was using strobe lights on this and I wanted to make sure that his face is in focus. So a lot of you out there that might want to use the 1.7 for Portraiture for a medium format, I would definitely recommend stopping down. You're not going to get the entire face in focus at 1.7 unless you're far away from your subject. All right, so even at f3.2, you see some nice fall off here around the ears and the hair area, but enough to where I've got the face in focus because, of course, that is what I want to get in focus. There is a little bit of breakage up here because it needs to render for a bit. Give it a moment here because this is a very large file at 610 megabytes. But let's just zoom in here on the face now that we're at full resolution. And this is the power of the GFX 100S. Like I said before, if you want to do portraiture, get ready to do some touch-up. Now, Alan's face, his skin tone is actually pretty good, so I just need to remove some dark spots here, which I did in the final image. I'm very, very happy with the turnout of this. The lighting, bronze color lighting again, complements this setup really, really well, and just tacked sharp. My friend Ed here, we're doing a shoot with the Tag Heuer Carrera watch. It was in conjunction with Porsche, and I wanted something much more of a very vibrant, very, punchy blues, punchy reds, kind of more of a neon look to the image. So it's a little bit more stylized. This could be your preference or not, just something I was trying different with it. But again, this was shot with the 81.7. I shot this at nighttime. I like this lens for night photography because, the versatility with the 1.7 aperture. This was shot at f3.2, 1/40th of a second, ISO 2500. And as we zoom in on this, it is sharp. Okay, this is a JPEG actually. This was 63 megabytes because I had to reduce the file size on this. And I'm really happy with it. I softened this area a little bit just to sort of take away the harshness on the skin tone, but I'm really happy with the image. And again, it's a stylized choice. So now let's take a look at this shot here. This is much more of a stylized shot once again. I'll show you the before. This is the after, before, after here. I'm punching the colors up a little bit. I'm making it a little bit more vibrant. Again, edits are a personal choice. You may like or dislike this. But again, 610 megabyte TIFF file at 1.7 ISO 2500. I'm pretty happy with this for what it was. I mean, this was going on Instagram. So we had to shrink this file size down considerably to go on Instagram, of course, because it's not going to handle a 610 megabyte file, but I like the look and the overall vibe of it. Now, let's move on to landscape photography. Now, I was actually testing out the Laowa 15mm f4.5, I think it's a D0 shift lens. We'll be having a review coming up very shortly on it, if not by the time you're watching this with the GFX 100S. This was a shot I did at Gardens by the Bay. This is the Dale Chihuly exhibition where it's all blown glass all around this serene gardens area. It's very, very beautiful. This is a TIFF file, again, it's 610 megabytes, but this is why I removed some of the lighting fixtures here, took that here, and then I went a step further. I went into Luminar AI, and I really wanted to boost up the sky, give some clouds in there, nice little sunset, remove all the lights here because they were a bit distracting, and this is the final image. Now, this is a 4.80 megabyte image, very small considerably compared to the TIFF file, but again, holds the resolution beautifully. Now, this was interesting in how, in terms of I shot this was a 3-second exposure, ISO 100. I think it was stopped around f8 or f11 thereabouts, because obviously this is a manual aperture in the lens. You're not going to see it in the camera system. I'm really happy with the overall image quality coming out of this, and this is with the Laowa. So it's very sharp in the center. I'll talk about this in my review. A little softer in the corners again, but you are getting some of that. The trees are going to be a little bit blurry due to the exposure timing on it, so do keep that in mind. But when you nail focus, it looks fantastic. Here's with the 45-100 here. These are these red reads. Let's show you what it looks like after Luminar AI. This is actually a pretty cool software. There's a lot of videos out there on it, but it looks the business. And finally, let's look at some dogs here with the 81.7. These are JPEGs out of the GFX 100S at f2.8. Very, very cute. Look how sharp this is, ISO 200. Here is a French Bulldog, I believe. Absolutely stunning, f2.8. It's hard to get 1.7 and get it in focus. This one managed to get it out of a series of shots, but look how beautiful that is. But look at the depth of field on this. I mean, you got the eye in focus, but everything else pretty much goes out. So that, in a sense, is some of the shots I've taken with the GFX 100S. This is a fantastic camera system. You need to learn how to utilize it a bit more in terms of its resolution, in terms of the depth of field, especially when you're using the 1.7 from the 80mm. But if you have the patience for it and you have the storage capacity and the processing power in your laptop or PC or computer, you're going to be well rewarded with the best image quality out of any camera system. I would say consumer camera system on the market currently. It is that good. So as we saw in Lightroom, the image quality coming out of this camera is pretty fantastic, if I may say so myself. But let's talk about the video quality coming out of this system. And we're actually using the GFX 100S right now with the 45-100 at f4, 4K 25p nostalgic negative in terms of its profile with you guys right here. So yeah, this is it's impressive. This is a very decent video camera. If you want to do a lot of like fast tracking, this camera might not hold up to the other camera manufacturers out there that can do that, or even to, let's say, the X-T4. But if you're just doing, let's say, interview shots like this, or static shots where someone's talking, or if you want to do a slow movement, this is a fantastic camera system for it. It's a very formidable hybrid camera system for a lot of you out there. So if you want to do weddings and you want to record people, saying their vows, or if you want to, let's say, capture a moment between a couple or just someone like me talking, this works beautifully. The image quality coming out of this camera is stunning. Would you say so, Kai Hong?
Yep.
Okay, there we go. I mean, we talked about this in the GFX 100 review, how good the video is, and it's equally as good on the 100S. Now, of course, you can use the Atomos Ninja 5 and you can record into that and all that, but in camera alone is good enough for most of you out there, my personal opinion. Now let's talk about lenses for a moment. As I talked a little bit about them in the Lightroom, what are my favorite lenses on the 100S? Now, a lot of people have been debating between the 81.7 and the 110 f2. And I have debated this myself, and I've used both of these lenses. And I really still can't decide between these two because the 110 f2 is a magical lens in the Fujifilm lineup. Gives you a beautiful bokeh. Everything just kind of blows away in the background. Stunning sharpness, slightly faster autofocusing than the 81.7, but it's around a 90-some millimeter lens. So it's not an everyday kind of focal length. I mean, depending on your shooting needs, it may be for you, but for me, I tend to use something a little bit shorter. But the 81.7 is unique in that sense because it's around a 60 millimeters. So it's almost in that 50 millimeter focal range where, you know, for full frame users out there, that if you want to do street photography, you can do that. You can walk around, you can capture those moments. And at 1.7, it gives you fantastic low light performance. The f2 is also very good, but that 1.7 does give you a little bit extra in terms of that low light to keep that ISO down. But if you're looking at image quality, the 110 is still the king. But if you're looking at versatility, the 81.7 would be the lens I would recommend. That's the best way I could put it for you guys out there. Of course, the 45-100 is a fantastic lens. The 250 is a phenomenal telephoto lens out there if you want to do some wildlife photography or even some sports. You can do that with that lens. The teleconverter on it as well will give you that extra length. It is a weighty lens. It's not a zoom, so that will limit some of you out there, but if you know your focal range, you know you're going to be shooting at that, it's a fantastic lens. And it gives you some great images. But overall, my final thoughts on the 100S is I really like using this camera. And I know I say this on this channel, and I've said it in multiple videos on almost every camera that I use because all cameras are really good. But I found with the 100S for my shooting style, fashion, a little bit of lifestyle, some sports at times, some action, I found that the 100S fits my needs most of the time. Yes, if I'm shooting dirt bikes moving around or jumping in the air, it's not going to capture that. Or if I want to shoot someone running down the track, it may not capture those images, let's say like a 1DX3 or a Alpha 1 would do, but I don't shoot that all the time. So I was talking to a friend the other day and he's like, you know, when the R3 was announced, should I get the R3 instead of the 100S? I'm like, look, if you're only shooting sports a couple weeks out of the year, but mainly you are shooting landscapes and people and street scenes, the 100S should be your camera. Rent the high-speed camera when you need it, but this camera can pretty much give you everything you need, plus fantastic video at a really good price for medium format. So the 100S is probably one of my favorite cameras of 2021 thus far, and I've really enjoyed using it. Anyway, those are my thoughts on the camera system and the lenses. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. If I missed out on anything, I'll try to answer those comments for you. But with that, guys, stay safe, take care, and I'll chat to you soon.